The echo of bare feet brushing against the polished mat filled the gym like a quiet drumbeat, soft but insistent. Afternoon light sliced through the high windows, drawing golden stripes across the floor that flickered whenever someone moved. The smell was familiar, disinfectant, rubber soles, and faint sweat, and yet it never felt entirely comfortable to Ellie Nolan. She stood at the far end of the mat, her fists loose at her sides, her gaze focused, not on anyone else, but on a point just beyond the present. 14, lean, and quietly intense, Ellie moved like someone who had learned to listen to her own body long before she learned to speak up. Around her, the other students moved in near on their shouts of ki, ringing out on cue. They were sharp, loud, eager to be heard. But Ellie's movements, though silent, seemed louder than the rest, fluid, precise, stripped of drama, but full of control. Her kata didn't show off. It spoke. Even her transitions had weight. Where others flung their limbs with energy, she placed her strikes like punctuation, measured, final, exact. Coach Warren, tall and taut with a posture like a loaded spring, paced the room with clipped steps. His voice was clear, commanding. Strong form, Thomas. Olivia, tighten your stance. Don't bounce. Be grounded. Power begins from stillness. He didn't call Ellie's name. A few kids in the back noticed. One boy paused mid-form. Whoa, he muttered, not quite whispering. Where'd she learn that? Someone else laughed. Secret dojo kid, probably. Another snorted. Maybe her dad's a ninja. Ellie didn't flinch, didn't correct them. She simply bowed at the end of her sequence and stepped quietly back into line. Her skin tingled, not from embarrassment, but from something deeper. Something that always happened when people spoke about her, like she wasn't in the room. Coach Warren stopped pacing. Ellie Nolan, he called, his tone unreadable. She blinked once. Yes, sir? Front and center. Ellie stepped forward. The air shifted. Not quite hostile, but expectant. The room watched. Coach Warren's brow furrowed slightly. Who taught you that kata sequence? He asked. It's not part of the curriculum. There was a pause. Ellie hesitated for just a heartbeat, just long enough to be noticed. My grandfather, she answered. A flicker in Warren's eye. Curiosity? Skepticism? Your grandfather? Yes. He was a karate champion, 6-time national title holder. He taught me traditional form before I joined this program. A scoff came from the side. Okay, movie script. Then a chuckle. Wait, 6-time champ? Who was your grandpa, Bruce Lee? Ellie's voice didn't rise. She didn't defend. She just said clearly, Charles Nolan. The room froze. Then, laughter. You mean like Chuck Norris? A boy mimed a roundhouse kick. Another added, no way. The meme guy? Seriously? Chuck Norris is her grandpa? I think she watches too much YouTube. Coach Warren didn't laugh. Not visibly. But his silence was louder than the chuckles around him. He stared at her, long and direct, measuring. You're saying your grandfather is Charles Nolan, Chuck Norris, he said, each word laid down like a challenge. Yes, Ellie said again simply. He didn't speak right away. Then, stepping slightly closer, he asked, do you think using someone else's fame to gain attention is honorable? Her hands tightened by her sides. I wasn't trying to. You've disrespected this class and the spirit of our training, he cut in. You'll apologize to your classmates for lying. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was weighted. Ellie's gaze flicked across the room. Eyes met hers, some amused, some indifferent, none supportive. I didn't lie, she said, barely audible. Louder, Coach Warren barked. She raised her chin slightly. I didn't lie. The moment hung there, suspended like breath before a fall. Back home, hours later, Ellie unlocked her bike with fingers that trembled just slightly, though she wouldn't admit it to anyone. The ride home was quiet. No music in her ears. No wind on her face. Just the faint hum of tires on sun-scorched pavement and the memory of Coach Warren's stare. Chuck Norris, Charles Nolan, was watering his garden when she arrived. His white hair shimmered in the evening sun. He didn't look up right away. He just said, "You're home early." Ellie didn't respond. When he did look, his gaze landed on the side of her cheek. No words. No gasp. Just a pause. Then he turned, walked inside. Ellie followed. He poured 2 glasses of water. Saturday. Pulled an old photo from a drawer. A girl, age 6, grinning beside him in oversized GIs, standing in front of a dusty tournament banner. He slid it across the table. Said nothing. Finally, Ellie whispered. They laughed. His eyes stayed on her, steady. Then he hit me. The words dropped like stones. But Charles didn't flinch. Instead, he said quietly, "They always laugh first." Then he reached into another drawer, pulled out an old, warm black belt, creased, worn, folded. He placed it on the table. "You're not here to prove anything," he said. "But you should know how to stand when the floor disappears." Ellie stared at the belt. Her cheek still burned. But inside her chest, something had begun to shift. The ceiling fan spun above her head like a slow, mechanical lullaby that didn't care if she slept or not. Ellie lay still beneath the thin summer blanket, staring upward. The air in her chest felt thick, not heavy exactly, but too full. Her cheek no longer stung from the slap, but something deeper hadn't faded. That ache behind her ribs. The one that hadn't let go since yesterday. Somewhere down the hallway, the house murmured in small sounds. A floorboard creaked. Pipes sighed behind the wall. And somewhere beyond the window, a sprinkler kicked on with a hiss like a whisper. She rose without reason. Sleep wasn't coming. Her body needed something else. Air. Movement. Purpose. Outside, Charles was already in the garden. He moved like time didn't own him, slow but never aimless. His boots tapped lightly against the stone path as he raked along the flower bed, shoulders loose, grip light. Ellie stepped onto the porch barefoot, hugging herself. The cool planks pressed against her soles. "You're up early," she said. "You slept late," he replied without turning. She watched the rhythm of the rake, scrape, lift, pull. Scrape, lift, pull. She stood in the doorway for a moment longer, then stepped down. "About yesterday," she started. Charles didn't pause. "You hungry?" he asked. She blinked. The question cut through her prepared explanation. He set the rake down, nodded toward the side of the house. "Good. Then you can train before breakfast." They didn't walk far, just 10 paces beyond the last flower bush, where a square of grass had been trimmed short and flat. At one corner stood a wooden post, tilted slightly from age. It had no markings, no ropes, but the indents in the ground around it spoke clearly. It had been used. A lot. Charles rolled his shoulders and stretched one arm behind his back with a low grunt. "You remember the 3?" he asked. Ellie blinked. "The 3? The forms I taught you when you were 7. You used one yesterday." She hesitated, then nodded. "The breathing form and side step." He raised an eyebrow. "That's 2. She smiled, barely. "The pivot. For balance." He gave a small grunt of approval. "Still in you." "I never forgot them," she said quietly. "I just didn't know if they mattered in a place like that." Charles finally turned to her. His face didn't shift, but his eyes did, clear, alert. "They matter more in a place like that," he said. "Especially there." She looked down at her hands. The lines on her palms felt sharper than usual. The sweat from yesterday had long since dried, but the shame hadn't. She stepped onto the grass. It wasn't a mat, but it was level. Familiar. "Enough." Charles gestured. "Show me the first one." Slowly. So she moved. Not perfectly, but with care. Each breath rooted to motion. Each transition remembered, not rehearsed. He circled her quietly, the way wind moves around trees, not touching, just observing. When she finished, he gestured again, this time with intent. Again. Cleaner. She moved faster now. Clearer. When her hand struck forward, it didn't tremble. Not like yesterday. When she landed the final heel palm, Charles simply said, "That's enough." Ellie exhaled. Her chest rose and fell once. She wasn't exhausted, but something had shifted inside. Not pride. Not relief. Something older. A recognition. Like walking back into a room that used to belong to her. Charles reached into his back pocket. He pulled out a folded black belt, creased, faded, worn by years of practice and time. He didn't hand it to her. Didn't even say her name. He walked over to the wooden post and placed it there gently. Ellie stared at it. Then at him. "I'm not ready to wear that," she said. "You're not supposed to be," he replied. She waited for more. He didn't explain. Charles Nolan never explained. Not with speeches, anyway. But he looked at her again, those quiet, steady eyes, and said, "Honor isn't what you carry. It's what you stand on when everything else breaks." Ellie's throat caught. She didn't know what to say. So she didn't. She just nodded. Charles tapped the post once. "We eat in 20. Be faster than the eggs." As he walked back toward the house, Ellie stayed. The sunlight dried the sweat along her brow. The morning breeze moved gently through the trees. She looked again at the black belt. Not hers, not yet. But maybe, she thought, maybe that didn't matter. Because this time when she walked into that gym again, she wouldn't be alone. By the time Ellie stepped back onto the school campus, the sun was already high. The heat clung to her skin like a second layer, but she didn't sweat. Not from the temperature, anyway. Her legs moved steadily, but her chest tight. Her breath came slower than usual, each step pressing heavier than the one before. This was the same place. Same tan mats taped to the concrete floor. Same wooden benches along the wall. Same Coach Warren tying his belt at the center of the dojo. But something was different. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her, hands tucked casually into his pockets, was Charles Nolan. He wasn't dressed like a warrior. Just jeans, a tucked-in shirt, and his old, weathered cowboy hat that somehow made him look both timeless and sharp. His eyes scanned the gym, not in wonder, but like he'd been there before, years ago, in some other lifetime. Ellie didn't say much. Neither did he. Inside, the class was already warming up. Kicks flew toward invisible targets. Palms slapped thighs in time with shouts. But the noise died fast the moment heads turned and recognized the man beside her. "Is that?" someone whispered. "No way," said another. "Is that Chuck Norris?" "Nah, just someone who thinks he is." Coach Warren looked up from the mat. His expression hardened. He stood. "We're beginning now. Line up," he said, voice clipped. Then, with a glance toward Charles, "Guests may observe from the bleachers." Ellie stepped forward. "He's not here to watch." Warren's eyes narrowed. "Then what is this? Another story? A stunt?" "You asked who my grandfather was." Ellie said, calm. "I told you the truth. And yesterday you hit me for it." A few heads turned. Just slightly. Warren exhaled slowly. "This dojo is about discipline," he said, "not drama. Not legacy delusions." Charles took a step forward. Not aggressive. Just present. "You struck her," he said, voice quiet, "for saying who her family is." "I disciplined her for lying," Warren replied. "If you're the man she claims, then prove it." Charles tilted his head. "What would that prove to you?" Warren stepped closer. "You think walking in here with a hat and a name earns you respect? You want to settle this with a story?" "No." "Let's settle it on the mat." Ellie looked up at her grandfather. He didn't blink. Didn't turn. Just walked slowly to the center of the room and shrugged off his jacket. Underneath, a plain gray t-shirt clung to a frame worn by years, not weakened by them. Coach Warren cracked his neck. Bowed. Charles didn't. He only said one thing. "I don't fight to win. I fight to remind people what matters." The silence before the match was a living thing. Then Warren charged. He was fast, faster than anyone had seen him move in class. A jab. A spinning back fist. A low sweep. 1, 2, 3. Charles blocked the first. Dodged the second. Took a glancing strike from the third. "He's losing," someone whispered. "Maybe it's not really him," another muttered. But Ellie watched his stance shift, subtle, deliberate. The next time Warren struck, Charles didn't just block. He redirected, parried the blow like he'd known it was coming since the moment Warren's foot twitched. Then he moved. Not quickly, not theatrically, but with intention. A sidestep, a ridge hand, a footwork pivot that spun Warren slightly off balance. And then the room held its breath as a roundhouse snapped through the air, clean, fluid, quiet, and Warren hit the mat. Flat. No one cheered. No one clapped. Charles stood still, breathing steady. Warren groaned, rolled to his side. Charles didn't look down with triumph, only truth. This wasn't for me, he said. It was for her. Ellie's throat caught, but she didn't cry. Their eyes met across the room. This time no one laughed. It didn't happen all at once. The first video was just 12 seconds long. No captions. No build-up. Just the ending. Coach Warren on the mat. Charles Nolan standing over him. Still. Quiet. Unmoving. 12 seconds. Enough to ignite a match. Not enough to tell the fire's source. The comments were what you'd expect. Bro just got roundhoused by retirement. Chuck Norris memes are real? This your grandpa after forgetting his blood pressure meds. LARP dojo battle. I'm dying skull. Ellie saw it while brushing her teeth. Her thumb hovered over the replay button once, twice. She didn't press it again. She set her phone face down on the counter and stared at her own reflection, still wearing yesterday's strength like a borrowed jacket. It didn't quite fit yet, but it wasn't falling off either. By the time the sun dipped past the trees, another version of the video appeared. This one was different. This one had everything. It opened with her voice. I didn't lie. Then came the sound. Sharp. Shocking. The slap. Her cheek turning. The dead stillness after. Then the door creaking open. Chuck's footsteps. The shift in air. And his voice. I don't hit children. But I defend them. That clip didn't explode, it detonated. Martial arts forums reposted it with titles like, The Most Respectful Takedown in 10 Years. What Honor Looks Like, Unscripted. Chuck Norris didn't come to fight. He came to finish the lesson. By midnight, TikTokers had voice-overed it with emotional piano scores. A Brazilian black belt stitched it. This is why we bow first. Not to power. To respect. A retired Marine commented. That man didn't fight out of ego. He fought out of principle. We need more of that. The hashtags piled up like falling dominoes. Hashtag Justice for Ellie. Hashtag Chuck Norris is back. Hashtag Respect is not fear. Hashtag Truth in silence. By 2:30 a.m., Ellie couldn't sleep. She sat upright in bed, knees pulled to her chest, watching the comments pour in like rain on a windshield. Her DMs were flooded. Hey, I was in class. I'm sort of left. I didn't know the whole thing. You were right. One message from someone with no profile picture, no name, just text. I got kicked out of my dojo for calling out my instructor. I cried watching this. Thank you. Another said. You didn't scream. You didn't beg. You just stood there. And now everyone hears you. She read and read. Her hands shook, but not from fear. It felt like heat. Years of being quiet finally rising to the surface, like something exhaled through the screen that had lived under her skin too long. The floor creaked outside her door. Light spilled faintly from the kitchen. Charles didn't sleep early. She wasn't sure if he ever slept at all. She patted down the hallway in her socks, phone still in her hand. The scent of tea and lemon hung in the air. He was there at the counter, pouring hot water into a small ceramic mug. He didn't turn when she entered. You saw it, he asked. She nodded. It's everywhere. Charles leaned on the counter, held the cup with both hands like it was part of his breath. They'll talk for a few days, he said. Then they'll move on. Find something else to yell about. Ellie looked down. Are you mad they filmed it? He paused, then turned, met her eyes. No. Because the people who needed to see it saw it. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. It's weird, she murmured. All these people texting me now. People who didn't care yesterday. Charles nodded slowly. People don't always listen to words, he said. They watch action. There was a long silence. Not uncomfortable, just full of thought. Then he said quietly, "You stood your ground." After the slap, Ellie looked down again. "I was scared." "So was I," he replied. She blinked. "You didn't look scared." He smiled, small and dry. "Acting. Used to do it professionally." She laughed. "Just once, quiet, but real." He picked up his tea and turned back toward the hall. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be louder." Ellie stood there alone a moment longer. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. A notification. She didn't open it. Instead, she looked over at the black belt, still folded, still sitting beside her phone on the dresser. She picked it up. Held it. It felt different now. Not heavier. Just more hers. By the end of the week, everything felt sharper. More alert. Like the air itself had started paying attention. At the district office, no one was making eye contact. The coordinator arrived earlier than usual, crisp shirt, pressed lips, and the quiet kind of tension people carry after reading too many emails they weren't ready for. In the admin building, an iPad sat in the middle of the conference table. The video played on loop. No sound. Just images. The slap. The silence. The man stepping forward. The fall. No one interrupted. The principal finally spoke. "Do you believe what happened here was acceptable?" Coach Warren stood stiffly across the table, arms crossed, jaw tight. "I was enforcing discipline," he said. "The way we've always done in the dojo." The coordinator's voice was calm, precise. "And that includes striking a student?" Warren's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes flicked toward the screen again, as if hoping for a version that made him look better. There wasn't one. "You're not under criminal review," the principal said. "But you've broken trust with your students and with us." There was no argument left. No edits to make the story more convenient. The resignation letter was signed within the hour. At the dojo, his shoes weren't by the door. His name still sat on the whiteboard in black marker, but nobody touched the sparring gear he used. It leaned in the corner, like a warning, like a ghost. Ellie entered through the side. She didn't announce herself, didn't wait for a reaction. She bowed to the mat, the same way she always had, and took her place near the back row. A few students turned to look at her. Most didn't know what to say. But one kid near her whispered, just loud enough to carry. "You were right." She didn't turn, didn't smile, just nodded once. In the front of the room, a younger substitute instructor fidgeted with the clipboard. He looked too fresh, too unsure, like someone who wasn't just new to the role, but new to the silence that now filled the space. It was different from before. This silence didn't feel like fear. It felt like a breath being held, waiting. "Does anyone want to help lead warm-ups?" he asked, cautious. No one moved at first. Then 3 pairs of eyes turned toward Ellie. She didn't raise her hand. She simply stood, stepped forward, and said, "Let's start with breathing." And they did. Later that morning, in a separate studio room, a few students lingered. They hadn't stretched. They hadn't trained. They'd just stayed. The new coach looked up, unsure if he should send them home. But then one of the older students raised their hand. "Can I say something?" The coach nodded, stepping aside. The student walked to the front. Not a leader. Not someone who usually spoke. He looked down at his shoes for a second, then back up. "I thought this program was about karate," he said. "Turns out it wasn't. Not really." Another student stood. A girl this time. "He made us feel small when we didn't hit hard enough." Someone else added, "I cried in the locker room once. He told me to channel it. I just felt worse." One by one, voices rose. Soft. Cautious. But real. "I thought if I kept my head down, I'd be okay. I thought being quiet meant I didn't belong. I thought Ellie was lying." No one interrupted. No one denied. Then a hand reached up and erased Warren's name from the board. Someone else picked up a marker and wrote, slowly, "Respect is not fear. It's earned." No one erased it. Back in the main studio, Ellie rolled her wrists out as the class prepared for drills.
She didn't need to speak.
Her presence alone moved the room into motion. There were no ceremonial apologies, no grand acknowledgments. But something had shifted. They watched her differently now. Not with awe, not even with guilt, but with attention. As if she had become a mirror, and each of them was starting to see themselves more clearly for the first time. The drills began. Quiet, focused. Not louder, but deeper. And as Ellie moved through her first kata of the morning, her fists no longer clenched with restraint. They moved with direction. Behind her, one of the younger students hesitated during a sidestep. Ellie turned back, knelt beside her, and whispered, "Try it like this." The girl nodded. "Tried again."
Slower.
"Better," Ellie said softly, then moved on. Outside the dojo, a reporter had called the school twice. No one responded. Online, the video had now crossed 10 million views. But inside this room, there were no hashtags.
No headlines.
Just students breathing in unison, for the first time, like they weren't just mimicking the forms. They were becoming them. It began without fanfare.
No flyers.
No official schedule. No formal announcements. Just a few parents talking over folding chairs near the end of summer, asking if their kids could learn something from the girl from the video. Ellie didn't plan it. She didn't even call it a class. But on the edge of the community center lawn, where the grass didn't mind being uneven and the tree line crept close enough to shade the ground, a dozen kids took off their shoes and lined up. Some stood crooked. Some couldn't stop fidgeting. One had never even heard of karate. Ellie stood in front of them.
No whistle. No clipboard.
No command. Just her. Her GI wasn't crisp. It had creases from being folded too long and sleeves that she rolled twice to fit her arms. A black stripe peeked from the edge of her belt, not fully earned, not fully explained. But she wore it with something that mattered more than rank. Presence. Nearby, under the oak, Charles Nolan leaned against a bench. His cowboy hat tipped low, arms crossed. Watching. He hadn't said much all morning. Just helped set up, handed out water bottles, and moved a rock that was in the way of the practice space. Most of the kids didn't know who he was. To them, he was just a quiet old man who nodded when things went well. That was enough. The drills were simple. Breathing. Balance. Stepping without tension. Ellie didn't shout. She didn't bark instructions. She showed. Then waited. Then showed again. One boy kept falling during a pivot step. Ellie didn't correct him with words. She walked over, stood beside him, and repeated the motion.
Step.
Shift.
Breathe. Turn. She didn't ask him to follow.
She just did it. After 3 tries, he copied her. Better, she said, and moved on. A woman from the community board arrived halfway through class. Sunglasses, clipboard, the scent of hand sanitizer, and good intentions. She didn't interrupt. Just stood near Charles and whispered, "This is different." Charles didn't nod. He just tilted his head slightly. She added, "Would you be open to advising a mentorship program?" Charles said, "We'll see." The woman smiled, though he hadn't really answered. She looked at Ellie with something between curiosity and gratitude. Like she'd found the answer to a question she hadn't known how to ask. Class ended with a soft thank you and a collective bow that was more genuine than synchronized. No one asked when the next session would be. They just stayed, lingering. One girl asked Ellie where she learned to move like that. Ellie smiled faintly. "From someone who never yelled," she said. But everyone listened anyway. The kids dispersed, chasing siblings or parents or snacks. All except one. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, with big glasses and a scab on his chin from falling off a scooter. He held something folded in his hand, a piece of lined notebook paper, edges frayed like it had been in his pocket all week. He approached slowly. Didn't meet her eyes at first. "I wrote a thank you note," he mumbled. Ellie took it gently.
"For what?" she asked.
The boy shrugged. "I don't know."
"For being like that."
Then he turned and ran off without waiting for a reply. Ellie stared down at the paper, unfolded it. In crooked handwriting, it read, I believe you. She folded it back with both hands, held it against her chest for a moment, then slipped it into her pocket. That evening, Charles was walking past her room with a box of old gear, pads, gloves, a set of wooden blocks from a time Ellie barely remembered. "Hey," she called. He stopped. She held something out. Both hands. His old black belt. Still folded. Still worn. "I think I'm ready now," she said. Charles stepped closer, looked at the belt, then at her.
"No,"
he said quietly. Ellie's brow furrowed.
"No."
He smiled, the kind that came slow and soft and deep in the corners of the eyes. "You already were." He didn't take the belt from her. He let her keep holding it. Then he turned, the box under one arm, and walked down the hall without another word. She stood there, motionless for a moment, then went back inside. Found a simple wooden shadow box at the bottom of her closet. Opened it. Placed the belt inside. Right next to an old photo of them from years ago, both of them grinning in oversized uniforms, standing in front of a banner that no one remembered but them. She closed the glass. Set it near the window, where the morning light would land. Because now she understood. Honor isn't something you wear. It's something you pass on. And finally, she felt like she could. A week later, the sun still fell the same way across the lawn, cutting soft lines between tree shadows and sweat-stained grass. The classes had grown. Not by much, but enough to notice. 15 students now.
No ranking belts. No trophies.
Just bare feet, open hands, and breath. The flyers had started appearing, not by Ellie's doing, but passed from parent to parent, kid to kid. Handwritten. Word of mouth. Someone had scribbled "free karate," but the good kind, on a corkboard outside the grocery store. And somehow that was enough. Ellie's drills didn't change. She began every session the same. Standing still at the center, eyes closed for 5 breaths. Students followed without instruction. She didn't teach control. She modeled it. She didn't demand respect. She embodied it. The small ones copied her movements like shadows. The older ones tried harder not to show they cared, failing more each day. One afternoon, as class ended and the kids collected shoes and water bottles, Ellie noticed someone sitting on the outer bench, away from the group.
A boy.
Maybe 15. She knew him instantly. He was in the dojo the day Coach Warren slapped her. He hadn't laughed. But he hadn't looked at her either. He sat with his hood up now, staring at the grass like it held answers. Ellie walked over. Said nothing at first. Then, "Didn't think I'd see you again."
He looked up slowly.
His voice, when it came, was hoarse. "I didn't do anything." Ellie nodded. "I know. I should've." She didn't reply right away. Then she said simply, "Why are you here?" He shrugged. "I thought maybe you'd still let me train." Ellie watched him carefully. Not judging. Not forgiving.
Just seeing.
"You still want to fight?" He shook his head. "I want to stop feeling like I should have stood up and didn't." She let the moment breathe. Then pointed to a spot in the grass. "Class starts tomorrow. That square's open." He nodded once. Didn't smile. Didn't say thank you. But he came back the next day. And the next. That week, it rained for 2 days straight. Ellie moved class inside, an unused storage room in the back of the center, cleared of boxes and swept clean. The floor was cold tile. The light buzzed overhead. But the students bowed in anyway. No one complained. They moved slower in the confined space. More controlled. More deliberate. Ellie made sure of it. In that small room, even the breathing felt louder. After class, one of the new girls, a quiet kid with braces and a lisp, stayed behind. She approached Ellie slowly, holding something small. It was a locket.
Plastic. Cheap.
The kind you get in vending machines. But inside was a photo. Of Ellie. From the video. "I printed it out," the girl whispered. "So I could remember." Ellie didn't know what to say.
She didn't take it.
Just touched the girl's shoulder and said, "You don't need a photo. Just remember how you felt when you stood still." The girl beamed anyway. It was the first time Ellie saw herself become larger in someone else's eyes. Not because she fought, but because she stayed. That evening, at home, the kitchen smelled like lentils and old leather. Chuck was oiling an old training bag by the sink. Ellie sat at the table, reading a note from one of the parents. It simply said, "Whatever you're doing, it's working. My kid actually listens now." She folded it quietly. "You ever think this would happen?" she asked without looking up. Chuck didn't turn. "I didn't think it wouldn't," he said. She chuckled. "You always talk in riddles."
No.
"You just always expected answers." She nodded.
Fair.
After a pause, she said, "You know, I thought I was done with all this. After the dojo, after the slap." Chuck finally turned. His eyes didn't blink. "You weren't done. You were just done letting someone else define what it was." Ellie looked out the window. The grass outside swayed in slow motion. She thought about the boy on the bench, the girl with the locket, the small, silent rows of students now watching her every breath like it meant something. Not because of a viral video, because she was still there. She turned to Chuck. "What if I mess it up?" Chuck wiped his hands on a towel. "You will." She blinked. "You'll mess up," he said. "And you'll fix it. That's how you lead." No speech. Naughty students. Just the truth. And she didn't need more than that. By mid-September, they started calling it Ellie's school, though she never gave it a name. The community center printed a flyer. Then, too, a parent tagged the program in a local Facebook group. A food truck showed up one weekend with a sign, "Get your roundhouse meal with a side of honor." And just like that, what began as quiet practice beneath a tree started pulling in strangers. Some came to train. Some came to gawk. Some came because they'd seen the clip and thought maybe standing near her might fix something in their lives. Ellie didn't say much about it, but she noticed the shift. The bows weren't as deep. The chatter before class was louder. And one kid asked if they were going to get merch. She laughed it off. Sort of. Then came the email. An outreach agency had seen the full video. Not just the fight, but the second version. The one with her quote, the slap, and Charles's voice. They offered a partnership. Small grant. Branded curriculum. Social media support. Maybe even a docu-series. "Let's show the world what real martial arts looks like," the message said. "Let's build something big together." It sounded good. Professional. The kind of thing people worked their whole lives for. She reread the email 4 times. Then didn't answer. Not yet. 2 days later, she stood inside the meeting room at the community center, across from 2 representatives. Both wore matching polos. One held a branded folder with tabs. The other had slides on a tablet. "You're already doing something powerful," one said. "We want to help amplify that." Ellie nodded politely. "You could have new mats, uniforms, a real space, coaches to assist. We can make this safe and scalable." "And clean," the other added. "We have to retire the Chuck Norris name, of course. Just for legal clarity." Ellie blinked. "What do you mean?" "Well," the first one said, "you know, separating personal myth from public messaging. We want you, not nostalgia." The room felt colder somehow. The words felt wrong in her ears. Not insulting. Just sterile. They weren't offering support. They were offering structure in exchange for soul. That evening, Ellie didn't speak during dinner. Charles noticed. He always noticed. She was drying dishes when he finally said, "You look like someone trying not to look disappointed." She turned slowly. "They want to help, but only if I turn it into something else." He nodded once. "They want numbers," she said. "Metrics. Consistency. Control." Charles sipped his tea. "That's not help. That's a plan with your name on it." Ellie set the towel down. "But what if I say no and lose everything?" Charles stood, walked toward the garage. She followed. Inside was the old wooden frame of a practice dummy, a punching pad duct-taped in 3 places, and a black and white photo nailed to the wall. Charles in his 20s, high kick frozen in midair like he'd hung there on purpose. He handed her a marker. "Then don't lose it," he said. Redefine it. She looked around. At the scuffed mats, the worn belts, the weight of air that had seen more practice than performance. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The next morning, Ellie walked into the meeting room at the community center and handed back the folder. "No thank you," she said. "This doesn't fit what we're building." The woman blinked. "You mean you're building?" Ellie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No," she said. "What we're building. The kids. The parents. The quiet ones in the back who show up and breathe and bow. This isn't a story to sell. It's something we get to live." They didn't argue. Just nodded. She left the room feeling 10 pounds lighter. And maybe 5 years older. That weekend, the kids arrived to something new. Not flashier. Not fancier. Just different. The mats had been moved. A new border of small stones created an invisible wall around the grass. At the far end, a wooden sign now hung between two branches. Not a logo. Not a brand. Just one line, hand-carved by Ellie herself. "Respect is not fear." Underneath it, smaller. "Earned. Shared. Remembered." The kids didn't ask for an explanation. They just bowed like always. And when they stood again, something felt steadier beneath their feet, like a floor that wouldn't disappear. The letter came folded in thirds. On letterhead she recognized before reading a single word. The old dojo. The place where silence had once wrapped around her like a bruise. She turned it over in her hands twice before opening it. "We're under new direction now. We'd be honored if you came back, not as a student. As a guest. As a teacher.
To speak.
To lead a session. Or just to be seen. The choice is yours." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't polished. But it was intentional. And that made it real. She sat with the letter for an hour before speaking to anyone. Then finally, after dinner, she slid it across the table to Charles. He read it.
Once.
Then set it down beside his cup. He didn't say what she should do. He never did. He just said, "Go if you have something to leave behind. Not something to reclaim." She showed up 3 days later. Same building. Same mats. But something had shifted. The windows were cleaner. The gear better arranged. A mural now ran along one wall. Brushstrokes of kids bowing to each other, not an instructor. She stepped inside and felt her spine tighten. Not from fear. From memory. The room didn't remember her. But her body did. The air smelled of lemon oil and foam padding. The floor creaked in the same places. But Coach Warren was gone. Replaced by someone younger. Softer at the edges. Still learning authority, not performing it. He greeted her with both palms open. Not a bow of rank, but one of welcome. "We're grateful you came," he said. "You didn't have to." "I know," she replied. He led her to the front, then stepped aside. No microphone. No intro. Just space. She didn't take the center. She stood off to the right. Faced the row of kids, some familiar, some not.
And said,
"I used to stand on this floor with a quiet mouth and full fists. And no one listened, because I didn't speak up. But also, because I was never what they were ready to hear."
She paused.
Not for effect, but to let herself feel it. "What happened here didn't break me, but it taught me how easily people confuse loudness with leadership, and silence with weakness." She looked out across the mat. One student, maybe 11, maybe 12, sat cross-legged, eyes wide. Another fiddled with her belt, like trying to untie something more than fabric. "I don't want to be a story you watch and forget. I want you to remember one thing. Honor isn't obedience. It's standing steady when everyone else turns away." The room didn't applaud. That wasn't what it was for. But a few students bowed, not because they were told to, because they understood. And that mattered more. After the session, the new instructor approached her again. Nervous. "You could come back if you want.
Teach.
Visit. Whatever you decide." Ellie smiled, soft. "I think you've got this," she said. "I came to return something." He tilted his head.
"What?"
She walked over to the wall. Touched the floorboard beneath the mural, the one that always creaked when someone stepped just a little too heavy. "I left my fear here," she said. "Just came to pick it up. Outside. The air felt wider. She stepped down the dojo steps barefoot, shoes in hand. The pavement was warm. A breeze stirred her hair. Charles waited in the car, arms crossed, engine off. She slid into the passenger seat, silent. He looked over. Well, she leaned her head back against the seat, eyes closed. It's smaller than I remembered, she said. Charles smirked. Most things are. She didn't need to say more. The drive home was quiet, but not the same kind of quiet as before. It was the quiet of things having landed. Of something closed, not because it was forgotten. Fall came slowly. The heat lifted, but the light stayed gold. The air turned crisp, and the wind rustled the trees like they were clearing their throats before winter. Classes continued, though Ellie no longer needed to lead every movement. One day, she arrived to find two of her older students already setting up mats. One was guiding a group of new kids through basic steps. She watched for a moment before stepping back. Not away, just aside. They didn't need her in the center anymore. And strangely, that felt like winning. One Saturday, a new girl, 7 years old, ponytail too high to stay put, asked if Ellie was the karate lady from the video. Ellie smiled.
Kind of, she said.
But that's not what matters. What matters then? The girl asked. Ellie pointed at her chest. How you feel when you're standing still. At home that evening, the windows glowed with the low sun. Charles was sorting through old training books in the garage. Manuals from before internet tutorials, before everything came in pixels. Ellie stepped in and handed him a folded cloth. Her own black belt. Still soft. Still imperfect. I think I know where I want this, she said. He looked at her, didn't speak. She walked to the back wall, where the shadow box hung with his old belt, their tournament photo, and the note from that boy months ago. I believe you. She opened the glass, placed her belt just below his, then closed it gently. The next morning, class began like it always did. No music.
No instructions.
Just breath. A younger student stumbled in the first drill and looked around, embarrassed. One of the older kids walked over.
Didn't laugh.
Didn't correct. Just stood beside her. Moved again.
Step. Shift. Breathe. Turn.
Ellie watched from the edge. She wasn't leading now.
She didn't need to.
Because they remembered. That afternoon, she walked alone to the field behind the community center. The leaves had started to fall in slow spirals, settling into grass without fanfare. She sat under the oak where it had all begun. Listened. No applause. No screens. Just the sound of something steady.
Breath.
Footfalls. And quiet respect earned, not from fear, not from fame, but from presence. Back at home, Charles had written a note. She found it taped to the fridge beside a list of groceries. In his thick, all-caps handwriting it read, You didn't build a class. You started a lineage. The difference? Your students will never need to mention your name, but they'll remember what it felt like to stand beside you. She read it twice, then left it there, right where it belonged. And so, the girl who had once stood alone on a mat surrounded by laughter now stood at the edge of something else. A practice that didn't begin or end with her name.
Just with a truth passed on.
Quietly, deliberately, and permanently. Because it had been faced.